Right, we have some breaking news just into CNN. A federal judge has ordered former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and a number of other former top aides to testify in the special counsel's January 6th investigation. The judge rejected Trump's claims of executive privilege. Let's get right to CNN's Evan Perez. Evan, tell us what this means, because this may open the door to so much more information in this case.
It really does, Brianna. The Justice Department has been winning these cases where they're asking a judge to compel some of these former Trump aides to answer questions as part of this investigation into the attempts by the former president to overturn the 2020 election results. And they keep winning these because the judges are finding that because of the importance of this investigation, the former president's claim that this is protected by executive privilege just does not stand. In this case, we're talking about Mark Meadows, who is, of course, former chief of staff. He's a very, very important witness. He was there through all of this, and in some cases played a key role trying to pressure people to try to help support the former president's false claims of vote fraud.
Okay, so this is a story about what happens when the person who was standing right next to the president through the entire post-election crisis, the chief of staff who was in every room and on every call and who saw everything firsthand, turns around and tells federal investigators under oath and under penalty of perjury that Trump knew the stolen election story was never backed by any real evidence, and that Trump kept pushing those lies anyway, even after being told repeatedly there was no fraud. Mark Meadows has become political dynamite again, as the details of his immunity-backed testimony are colliding with his past public defenses and with his own book, sparking fresh fury on Capitol Hill that has Democrats demanding answers and Republicans divided over whether Meadows is a traitor who sold out Trump or a reluctant truth teller who finally stopped lying when it mattered. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Who've been watching this investigation very closely believe is happening here is the importance of these witnesses is for the special counsel to establish what the former president knew, what were his closest, most trusted people telling him. You had people who were like Robert O'Brien, for instance, who was his national security advisor and who was telling him that there was absolutely no evidence that there was foreign involvement in rigging voting machines, for instance, which is something that Trump was being told by what I think some of the witnesses have called Team Crazy, people like Rudy Giuliani and some of the other people who were trying to tell him that, well, maybe there was some kind of interference, right, in the voting machine.
Let me walk you through exactly what Meadows told investigators, because this testimony represents the most damaging insider account of what Trump actually knew during the critical period between the election and January 6th. Under an immunity order from special counsel Jack Smith, meaning he could tell the truth without facing prosecution for his own role in what happened, Meadows told federal prosecutors and a grand jury that he repeatedly informed Trump there was no credible evidence of widespread fraud that would have changed the election outcome. He said the Department of Justice was properly investigating the wild claims coming from Rudy Giuliani and others, and that those investigations were systematically debunking the fraud allegations rather than confirming them. Meadows reportedly told investigators that Trump was dishonest when he declared victory on election night while key states were still counting ballots. Think about what that means. The chief of staff is saying under oath that he witnessed Trump deliberately lying to the American people about winning an election that was not yet decided. Trump's claim of victory that night was not a good faith belief based on the available evidence. It was dishonest, according to the person closest to him who watched it happen in real time. Meadows also recounted Trump privately acknowledging that their final Supreme Court loss in December 2020 was the end, a moment where Trump said words to the effect of, "So that's it," and recognized that the legal fight was over. But even after that private acknowledgement of defeat, Trump continued pushing the fraud lies in public and pressing forward with schemes to stay in power anyway. The chief of staff is saying Trump knew he had lost and kept lying anyway, which goes directly to the question of criminal intent that would have been central at any trial. According to ABC News reporting on his sealed testimony, Meadows told investigators he has yet to see any evidence of fraud that would have kept Joe Biden from the White House. He said he agrees with the official assessment that 2020 was the most secure election in United States history. This is Trump's own chief of staff, the person who was managing the White House response to the election, saying he saw no evidence of the fraud Trump was claiming. If Meadows saw no evidence despite being at the center of everything, that strongly suggests no such evidence existed because he would have been the first to see it. Sources say Meadows recounted telling Trump directly by mid-December 2020 that Rudy Giuliani had produced no proof to back up his sensational claims about stolen voting machines and foreign interference and all the other conspiracy theories that were flying around. He told investigators that then Attorney General Bill Barr had already told both him and Trump that the DOJ investigations were finding the fraud allegations were not panning out, meaning the claims were being investigated and disproven rather than confirmed. Trump heard this directly from his Attorney General and his Chief of Staff and kept pushing the lies anyway. Perhaps most significantly, Meadows contradicted parts of his own memoir under oath. He admitted to investigators that he now believes the Department of Justice did take fraud referrals seriously and that he disagrees with statements in his own book suggesting that cases were not seriously investigated. This is Meadows saying his book was wrong, or more precisely, saying under oath what he was unwilling to say publicly when he was trying to stay in Trump's good graces and sell copies. The discrepancy between what Meadows told prosecutors privately and what he said publicly creates its own set of problems. A House report and criminal contempt referral noted that Meadows refused to testify fully to Congress, even while privately providing far more candid accounts to prosecutors under immunity. This has fueled calls from some lawmakers to revisit whether Meadows misled or stonewalled the legislative branch while being honest with prosecutors because the immunity deal protected him there, but not with Congress. Capitol Hill is erupting because these revelations deepen the civil war inside Trump world over what to do about Meadows. On the MAGA right, Meadows has become what some call the least trusted man in Washington, someone who betrayed Trump by telling the truth to prosecutors while maintaining public loyalty. Democrats see him as proof that everyone inside Trump's circle knew the fraud claims were lies and that the entire post-election scheme was built on deliberate deception. Republicans are divided between those who dismiss Meadows as a turncoat whose testimony cannot be trusted and those who recognize that his account under oath carries significant legal weight, regardless of how inconvenient it is politically. All right. So let me walk you through in much more detail what Meadows told investigators and why this testimony is so significant for understanding what Trump actually knew during the post-election period and why it matters that this account came from Trump's own chief of staff speaking under oath with immunity protection. Because understanding the specifics of what Meadows revealed is essential for grasping why Capitol Hill is erupting and why this testimony cuts to the heart of Trump's defense in ways that no outside witness ever could. Mark Meadows occupied a unique position during the critical period between the November 2020 election and January 6, 2021. As White House Chief of Staff, he was in virtually every important meeting and on virtually every important call. He was Trump's gatekeeper and advisor, and the person responsible for managing the White House response to the election results and their aftermath. There was no one closer to Trump during this period except perhaps family members, and Meadows had a professional responsibility to be informed about everything happening inside the administration. When Special Counsel Jack Smith's team sought Meadows' testimony, they recognized that his account would be uniquely valuable precisely because of this access. But Meadows initially resisted providing testimony and was held in criminal contempt by the House for refusing to cooperate with the January 6 committee. The breakthrough came when Smith offered Meadows an immunity deal, protection from prosecution, in exchange for truthful testimony. Under immunity, Meadows could tell the truth without fear that his words would be used to prosecute him for his own role in the post-election schemes. The immunity deal fundamentally changed Meadows' incentives. When he was maintaining public loyalty to Trump and selling his book, he had every reason to shade the truth in Trump's favor. When he was testifying under oath with immunity, he had every reason to tell the truth because lying to federal investigators is a crime that immunity would not protect him from. The same person who had been publicly supportive of Trump's claims was now in a position where honesty was his only protection. What Meadows told prosecutors under these conditions was devastating for Trump's narrative and his legal defense. He stated clearly that he never saw any evidence of fraud that would have kept Joe Biden from the White House. This is not some Democratic partisan or media critic saying Trump's fraud claims were baseless. This is Trump's own chief of staff, who had access to everything, saying he saw no evidence supporting the claims Trump was making publicly. If Meadows, with all his access, saw no evidence, that strongly suggests the evidence did not exist because it would have flowed through him on its way to Trump. Meadows said he agrees with the official assessment that 2020 was the most secure election in American history. This assessment came from Trump's own cybersecurity officials who were subsequently fired for contradicting Trump's narrative. Meadows is confirming that the professional assessment of election security was accurate and that Trump's claims of massive fraud were not supported by what the government's own experts found when they evaluated the election. The testimony about Meadows repeatedly informing Trump that there was no credible fraud evidence is particularly significant because it establishes Trump's knowledge and intent. If Trump genuinely believed the election was stolen, that might mitigate his culpability, even if his methods of contesting it were improper. But if Trump was told repeatedly by his own chief of staff and his attorney general that there was no fraud and he kept pushing the lies anyway, that shows he was acting with knowledge that his claims were false. Criminal intent requires proving the defendant knew what they were doing was wrong, and Meadows' testimony provides that proof. Meadows recounted specific conversations where he told Trump that Rudy Giuliani was producing no proof for his sensational fraud claims. By mid-December 2020, weeks before January 6, Meadows had informed Trump directly that Giuliani's investigations and legal challenges were coming up empty. The theories about Venezuelan voting machines and Italian satellites and all the other conspiracy claims were being investigated and were not panning out, according to what Meadows told Trump. Yet Trump continued promoting these theories publicly and using them to justify his efforts to stay in power. The testimony about Attorney General Bill Barr adds another layer of contemporaneous knowledge. Barr told both Trump and Meadows that the DOJ investigations were finding fraud allegations were not supported by evidence. This was the Attorney General, Trump's own appointee, running the Justice Department, telling the president directly that the fraud claims were not panning out. When the president's attorney general and chief of staff are both saying there is no fraud and the president keeps claiming massive fraud anyway, that is powerful evidence of knowing deception. Meadows' description of Trump's election night declaration of victory as dishonest provides insight into Trump's mindset from the very beginning. Trump did not wait for votes to be counted and then genuinely believe he won based on flawed information. He declared victory while votes were still being counted, knowing the declaration was premature and knowing that mail-in ballots favoring Biden had not yet been tallied. The dishonesty started on election night, according to Meadows, and continued through January 6th and beyond. The private acknowledgement that their Supreme Court loss was the end is particularly significant because it shows Trump knew the legal fight was over. After the Supreme Court rejected the final legal challenges in December 2020, Trump privately said words to the effect of, "So that's it," and acknowledged they were done, according to Meadows' testimony. Yet Trump continued to publicly claim the election was stolen and continued pressuring officials and pushing schemes to stay in power. The gap between private acknowledgement and public claims is evidence of deliberate deception. The contradiction between Meadows' testimony and his own book creates its own set of problems. In his memoir published after leaving the White House, Meadows suggested that fraud allegations had not been seriously investigated and that questions remained about the election's integrity. Under oath, he admitted those suggestions in his book were wrong, that DOJ did take referrals seriously and did investigate claims thoroughly. This means Meadows was saying one thing publicly to maintain his standing with Trump and Trump's base while saying something completely different under oath when accuracy actually mattered. This pattern of public deception, combined with private truth-telling, is what has Capitol Hill erupting. Democrats argue that Meadows misled the public and possibly Congress while being honest only when immunity protected him from prosecution for his testimony. They are calling for a revisiting of whether Meadows should face consequences for stonewalling the January 6th committee while providing candid accounts to prosecutors. The contempt referral that led to charges against Meadows was based on his refusal to cooperate, and now it appears he was willing to cooperate fully when the legal incentives align properly. Republicans are divided over how to handle the Meadows situation. Some dismiss his testimony as the words of a turncoat who betrayed Trump to save himself and whose account therefore cannot be trusted. They argue that immunity testimony is inherently suspect because the witness has every incentive to tell prosecutors what they want to hear. Others recognize that Meadows' account under oath carries significant legal weight and that his access to Trump during the relevant period makes his testimony uniquely valuable, regardless of how politically inconvenient it may be. The civil war inside Trump world over Meadows reflects broader tensions about loyalty and truth-telling. Meadows maintained public loyalty to Trump for years after leaving the White House, defending Trump on television and in his book, and staying in Trump's orbit. His immunity testimony represented a break from that pattern, telling investigators what he actually witnessed rather than what Trump wanted the public to believe. For the MAGA faithful, this makes Meadows a traitor who cannot be trusted. For others, it suggests that the truth about Trump's conduct is so damaging that even loyalists cannot hide it under oath. Okay, so let us break down exactly what Meadows' testimony means and why it has Capitol Hill erupting with fury and recrimination as the implications of his immunity-backed statements become clear for Trump's past conduct and potential future accountability. Point number 1, Meadows testified under oath that he never saw any evidence of fraud that would have kept Joe Biden from the White House, a direct contradiction of the claims Trump was making publicly and that Meadows himself had defended publicly before receiving immunity. The chief of staff with access to everything says there was no evidence supporting Trump's central claim. Point number 2, Meadows said he agrees with the official assessment that 2020 was the most secure election in American history, confirming that Trump's own cybersecurity experts were right, and that Trump's fraud claims were not supported by what the government found when it evaluated election security. Point number 3. Meadows recounted repeatedly telling Trump there was no credible fraud evidence and that Giuliani's claims were not panning out, establishing that Trump was informed by his chief of staff that his public statements were not supported by evidence. This goes directly to proving Trump's criminal intent by showing he knew his claims were false. Point number 4. Meadows described Trump's election night declaration of victory as dishonest, indicating that the deception started immediately and was not a good faith response to flawed information, but a deliberate lie told while votes were still being counted. Point number 5. Meadows recounted Trump privately acknowledging their Supreme Court loss as the end, showing Trump knew the legal fight was over, even as he continued publicly claiming the election was stolen and pressing forward with schemes to stay in power anyway. Point number 6. Meadows contradicted his own book under oath, admitting that his published suggestion that DOJ did not seriously investigate fraud claims was wrong. This shows Meadows was saying one thing publicly and something completely different when accuracy actually mattered under oath. Point number 7. The discrepancy between Meadows stonewalling Congress while providing candid testimony to prosecutors has fueled calls to revisit whether he misled or obstructed the legislative branch while being honest only when immunity protected him. Point number 8. Meadows has become deeply divisive within Trump world, viewed as a traitor by some and a reluctant truth teller by others. The civil war over how to handle his testimony reflects broader tensions about loyalty and honesty within the Republican coalition. Point number 9. Special Counsel Smith's final report preserved Meadows' testimony and conclusions for potential future prosecution or congressional action, meaning this evidence does not disappear just because current prosecutions were dismissed. The record exists for whenever Trump is no longer shielded by DOJ policy. So where does all of this leave the Capitol as it erupts over the implications of what Meadows told investigators about what Trump actually knew? Democrats are using his testimony to argue that the stolen election narrative was always known to be false by Trump's own inner circle, that everyone around Trump, including his chief of staff, knew there was no evidence of fraud and that Trump kept lying anyway. They see Meadows' testimony as proof of deliberate deception that should have resulted in conviction and that may yet result in prosecution after Trump leaves office. Democrats are also calling for a revisiting of Meadows' treatment by Congress, questioning whether he should face consequences for the gap between what he told prosecutors and what he refused to tell congressional investigators. The contempt referral was based on his refusal to cooperate with Congress, but now it appears he was willing to provide extensive cooperation when the legal terms were right. This raises questions about whether he misled Congress or simply exploited a loophole that allowed him to be honest with prosecutors while stonewalling lawmakers. Republicans remain divided about how to handle Meadows and his testimony. The Trump loyalist faction dismisses everything Meadows said as unreliable, arguing that he told prosecutors whatever they wanted to hear to protect himself and that nothing he said under immunity should be credited. They point to his previous public defenses of Trump as evidence that his sworn testimony represents a change of story rather than the truth finally emerging. Other Republicans recognize the weight that sworn testimony carries, regardless of the circumstances under which it was given. Meadows was not some peripheral figure whose account can be easily dismissed. He was the White House chief of staff with direct access to everything that happened. His testimony is corroborated by other witnesses and by contemporaneous documents. Dismissing it as unreliable requires explaining why Trump's own chief of staff would lie under oath about what he witnessed. The implications for Trump's narrative are severe. His entire defense on the election interference allegations rested on the claim that he genuinely believed the election was stolen and was acting in good faith to address what he saw as a grave injustice. Meadows' testimony demolishes that defense by establishing that Trump was told repeatedly by his own people that there was no fraud and kept lying anyway. If Trump knew his claims were false when he made them, the good faith defense collapses entirely. For future accountability, Meadows' testimony is preserved in the record and in Smith's final report. The dismissal of current prosecutions because of DOJ policy, shielding sitting presidents, does not erase the evidence that was assembled. Whenever Trump leaves office again, whether in 2029 or earlier, that evidentiary record will still exist and can form the basis for renewed prosecution if future prosecutors choose to pursue it. Meadows' sworn statements under immunity will remain available as evidence. The political implications extend beyond just legal accountability. Even without prosecution, Meadows' testimony provides ammunition for the impeachment resolutions that remain pending in Congress. His account of what Trump knew and when he knew it supports the articles alleging that Trump deliberately lied to the American people and pressured officials to overturn an election he knew he had lost. Whether those resolutions advance depends on political will, but the factual predicate is strengthened by what Meadows revealed. The fire that Meadows has sparked is not going away anytime soon. His testimony created a documented record of Trump's knowledge that cannot be unsaid or retracted. The chief of staff who stood next to Trump through everything has now told investigators under oath that the stolen election story was never backed by evidence and that Trump knew it. That truth is now part of the permanent record, and Capitol Hill is erupting because the implications of that truth are impossible to ignore, no matter how hard Trump and his allies try to dismiss or discredit the messenger who delivered it. That is the story of Mark Meadows, sparking fire as Capitol Hill erupts over shock testimony that Trump knew he lost. The insider account that confirms what prosecutors allege and what Trump's defenders denied throughout years of investigation and litigation. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about all of this. Does Meadows' immunity testimony change how you view Trump's post-election conduct? Should there be consequences for the gap between what he told prosecutors and what he refused to tell Congress? And does this testimony matter now that the prosecutions have been dismissed? Hit subscribe because this story continues to resonate, and there will be much more to cover as the implications of Meadows' testimony play out in Congress and in the ongoing debates about accountability and truth. See you in the next one.